I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. You're not going to believe this, but maybe you are because you already looked at the podcast description and the podcast title. This episode is part 1 with none other than Walt Flanagan. The Walter Flanagan that is maybe the most integral part of the Comic Book Man TV show and the wildly successful Tell 'em Steve Dave podcast on the Smodcast Podcast Network. In this episode, we talk about what Walt did before the stash, how Walt got involved running the stash, and some fun stories about the Tell 'em Steve Dave podcast and the Comic Book Man TV show. Never in my wildest imagination did I think that I would get to interview Walt Flanagan. Of the three, I felt sure that this would be the one I could never get. But lo and behold, maybe it was pandemic-induced boredom, or maybe Walt just likes me. We'll never know. This was recorded during all the self-distancing due to the coronavirus outbreak. So if that is over by now, woohoo! If not, damn it. But either way, this is my conversation with Tell 'em Steve Dave's Walt Flanagan. Part 1. Yeah, talk to me, yeah. Welcome to Fascination Street Podcast, Walt Flanagan. How you doing today, Walt?
Hello, how are you?
I am wonderful. First of all, thank you so much for doing this. Longtime fan. You are an ungettable guest, so I am elated that this is happening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you've asked me a couple of times, right?
Well, you know what? I've really only asked you the once because I know that you don't really do this. So, I mean, we have been, I guess, emailing back and forth for almost 10 years. Like, it's been a long time that we've been emailing back and forth every once in a while. But I've never asked you just because it's such a sacred ask, and I didn't want to put you off because, like I said, I know you really don't do that. But I figured with this quarantine thing, maybe you might have some time, and it turns out you did. So thank you again.
My pleasure.
I can't imagine there's anybody who doesn't know, but for those listening who don't know, Walt Flanagan is part of, arguably the most important part of, the Tell 'em Steve Dave podcast. He was the most integral part of the Comic Book Men TV show on AMC, and he's been in almost every Kevin Smith movie that there has been. Almost. Walt. Can I call you Walt?
Yes, call me Walt.
Tell me where you were born, Walt.
Where I was born?
Yeah, born and raised, man. Where's that at?
Born and raised in New Jersey.
The whole state?
The whole state. Perth Amboy, New Jersey, I believe, was where I was born.
Oh, interesting.
It's about 25 minutes from where I live, Perth Amboy, so I really didn't venture very far from my birth spot.
Now, I know that you you run the Secret Stash on Broad Street in Red Bank, which I've been to a few times and met you. Thank you for being super cool. How did it happen that you ended up being at the Secret Stash? I know that you worked at a local community center for a while. Is that right? When you were younger?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I worked for a long time. I don't know how many years. 87 or 86, I can't remember, till 97, 98.
Oh, shit. Really?
Yeah, so I worked there for 10 years. That was a very, very fun job. The director there was a guy that I really hit it off with. His name was Tim Hill. And I would go there as a young teen because he would always be running some sort of sporting activity there. He would be, whether it be indoor soccer or street hockey or just a pickup game of football. And he was about 10 years older than I was, but we kind of hit it off. I guess even then, your ball busting and stuff, that you hear on Tell 'em Steve Dave didn't start on Tell 'em Steve Dave. That was something we grew up doing. So all the kids that we were playing with, We would screw around, we would bust each other's balls, and like he wasn't somebody, even though he was quote unquote in charge, he'd go and laugh and partake gently, not as harsh as we would be. And we kind of just struck as much of a friendship as you can have when they're like, when I'm 14 and he's 24. We really didn't we would see each other and we would talk, and we'd talk about football or the NFL or NHL, anything really. And, I would go down there and like maybe once or twice a week play something. And then as the years grew on, I stopped going there as I got much older and I graduated high school. And I just happened to stop in there because I was around the block from my house. I would actually cut through the parking lot constantly to go to somebody else's house, a friend's house or something. So I would see him a lot. And I graduated high school and he asked me, like, what have you been doing? What have you been up to? And I said, oh, I'm not doing anything. I had a job at Food Town, but I had just quit it because it was awful. And he goes, why don't you just fill in an application here and, I'll see what I can do. And I filled one out and I got the job and I wound up staying there for 10 years, basically, just doing what he did, taking kids out and playing Nerf football, playing hockey. And it was awesome. It was a great job when you could do that. I mean, it would be like the day would fly by because you spent 4 hours out playing football and then, you look at the clock and it's, it's time to punch out. Great job. Loved it when you were doing that aspect of it. But as the years grew on, just like happened with me, it was, the kids that I was playing all these sports with, they aged out of going down there as they grew older, got cars and became young adults. And there was no replacement of the age appropriateness to do that activities, which I enjoyed doing. The kids now that were left at the center for me to interact with were like, 6, 7, which is that's a big difference when you're dealing with like 12 to 15-year-olds. It become very like mundane and it kind of like really bummed me out because I was just like, I'm doing puzzles. One puzzle felt like it took 3 hours, but it only took like, 10 minutes. And luckily though, at that time, Kevin had just made Clerks, not really just made it, but it had been a couple years later. And he had always entertained the notion of like buying a comic book store and opening it up. And he finally pulled the trigger on our local comic book store because the guy who ran it was selling it. And it really, put a fire under Kev. He was like, I'm going to do it. And I was like, well, did you look at his books? I mean, not his comic books, but his financial books. But Kev, really wasn't concerned about what this guy had done previously because he had a much bigger vision for what he wanted it to be, which was more of a comic book store / view askew kind of museum or like tourist spot. And he asked me, I'm going to do it. And he always we always talked about it when we went out. We would always be like, oh, I'd love to run a comic book store. And he was like, okay, well, I'm going to do it. So you got to come over now and you got to leave the job that you've known for the last 10 years and come do this, the unknown. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't pull the trigger on it because I still liked going to that job. Also, there was a financial security to it. I had just purchased a house. I had just been married for like a couple years before that. And I had benefits now, and I wasn't willing to leave that job because I wasn't sure, if Kev was in it for the long haul. And with this job, it gave me security. So I only went in part-time, and Brian, as I'm sure everyone knows, tabbed to run the store, and I would come in and just do orders for the store. I would just do the monthly comic book order and work on weekends.
Brian Johnson was running the stash before you, and you were just doing inventory, basically?
Yeah. Brian Johnson was the guy that was going to run the day-to-day operations of the Red Bank stash, yes.
Wow.
I mean, as much as he teases about the West Coast one, that worked out really well because I stayed at my old job and then I worked there on the weekends and I would see what had sold so we could place the orders for the months ahead. And then Kev decided he was going to take the stash that he had just purchased from the previous owner and move it up to the quote-unquote Main Street in Red Bank. And he came to me one more time and was like, I want you to run it. I promise you I'll make it run for 5 years. I promise you that the job will be there for 5 years. And at this point, my wife was pregnant. And he was like, and I'll match the salary that you're making at the community center, and I'll give it a little bump up if you come over. And I talked it over with my wife, and I was like, I weighed the cons and I weighed the pros, While I enjoyed that job at the community center, like I said, I was kind of just adrift, just waiting. As opposed to years earlier, I was like, I loved it. And now I kind of just was kind of lukewarm on it. And I was like, I'm going to pull the trigger. And I went over to the stash full time in 1998 and have been there since that decision.
So 22 years. So what was your wife's reaction? Her name is Debbie, right?
Yeah. She's like, you just got to do it.
Oh, she was all behind it?
I mean, the second offer, yeah. With the second offer, she was like, you should do it. Because she worked at the community center with me. I'd gotten her a job there a couple days a week because she was a teacher and they needed somebody down there with a teaching certificate. So she had gotten a job down there part-time, a couple of afternoons a week. So she was working there and where she loved working with little kids. It was just the opposite for me. I mean, it wasn't like I did it, it would be fun on occasion, but doing it day after day after day, I just realized it wasn't for me. I just wasn't, I could work with the older kids, but the younger kids didn't click for me as much as it was, for her. But she saw that I was kind of like not enjoying it as much, or not, I wouldn't even say not enjoying it as much, but the excitement and the opportunity of working at a comic book store, she knew that I would throw myself into it and really not take it lightly. And I was, really, really wanting to do it. So she was like, you should just do it. You just got to take a chance. He's not going to pull the plug. He said 5 years, there's no guarantee this job would be there for 5 years later because it was a town job. So every year, there would always be a review of people who were the employees in the town. So there was always that opportunity that they would, eliminate a position in town for budgetary reasons. So that was always over my head as well. So I just said, all right, I'm going to do it. And I came over to the stash, and the rest is history.
So what about the stash got you so excited? Was it the comic books? Was
comic
it
books.
Running? Really? It was the comics?
Yeah, it was just comic books. My whole life I had been going to comic book stores. Well, not my whole life. When comic book stores became a thing, as a stores that caters just to comic book collectors in the early 80s. Like I remember seeing one in 81, 82 was the first time I ever saw a store devoted solely to comic books. I was like, I want to do this. I want to be in charge of ordering product. I want to be the guy that puts up what the wall books are, like what the high priced wall books are or whatever. I had always thought that would be the greatest job. And I just thought that it would be not even going to work, that would be heaven. Reality was, though, that I really didn't want to do it at first, though, because I was like, there's too much unknowns. My heart was like, I wanted to do it, but my head said, you better not do this. You have security where you're at.
So running a store with multiple employees and, cash registers and books and inventory, that's kind of a lot to take in when previously, no offense, but your job was basically, like a babysitter for a long time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's exactly what it was. It was definitely a babysitter, but it wasn't hard or it wasn't something that was beyond us to figure out. It was kind of easy. It was just you had the previous owner's books in terms of his clients or his reservists, the guys who came in weekly to pick up their books that they reserved on the side. So you had a good idea of what kind of numbers you needed to order of certain titles based upon his reservist list and his customer base that you assumed were going to come over and stay when this guy left. Some did, some didn't, but most did. So it really was just monitoring the numbers, something that we still do to this day. Every week that you take account of the product that came in the previous week, it's not all that much. You see what's sold that week, and you start to place the order for the next 3 months based upon your gut feeling of what people are going to want.
Really? There's a lot of gut feeling involved in that?
Oh, yeah. In comic books, I think it's all gut feeling. It's okay, you have a new storyline starting on, Spider-Man. There's a new creative team. Do you think people are going to dig it? Do you think people are going to come over? Do you think people are going to drop it? There's some things that are no-brainers, if a certain hot artist is going to start up a run, if Frank Miller is going to start a new Batman series, you're going to, or there's a big event that they call them in comic book land, some sort of crossover heavy Marvel Universe event is starting up. You have to go with what you think the clientele is going to have an interest in and order accordingly.
Wow, that's amazing. So that means you really have to pay attention to what's going on in that industry, in that field.
Right. Yeah, you have to really be on top of the trends And there's always the things that, like, the surprises that catch a retailer by, not with their pants down, but like they don't announce something that's going to happen, like a death of a certain character, and then you're caught, scrambling to try to get copies. I mean, that happens like once a year. But for the most part, it's pretty much, like, I could tell you, Amazing Spider-Man since 1997 is a book that you can count on. We order between 12 and 17 copies for the last 22 years.
No shit.
That's how consistent some of the titles are, at that level of consistency.
Okay, so that's the one that a few years back they had, I think, did they have the Death of Spider-Man in that series?
That was Ultimate Spider-Man.
Oh, okay.
I was just talking about Amazing Spider.
Right.
There's so many Spider-Man titles, but the main core Spider-Man book, Amazing Spider-Man. There are, of course, there are anomalies in that 22 years where a certain issue was ordered a little bit higher because of a certain thing was going to happen in it. But for the most part, I could look back at the orders placed since 1998, and it's probably between 12 and 18 copies every single month.
Wow. That's amazing. Amazing Spider-Man. So you would say that that's probably your biggest, well, I mean, you did say that's your biggest seller.
It's not the biggest one, but it's just the one
it's the most consistent.
It's been there since, well, I mean, it's a title that is going to be there every month. It's just one of the core books, like a Batman or Superman, Spider-Man, X-Men.
Gotcha.
They're just, they seemingly, unless they start over with a number one, you place the same number of orders for that title for the last 22 years, except on rare occasions.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hey, guys. If you're like me, quarantine or not, you and your family are looking for new things to do together that don't involve staring at a screen. I have the perfect solution. It's a new trivia game called You Know It, and it's a blast, and you can try it for free. You Know It was created by John Sylvain, one of the hosts of the Nooner podcast on Kevin Smith's Smodcast podcast network. And since I'm a fan of that podcast, I signed up for an early copy when John launched his Kickstarter campaign. Really, I just wanted to be supportive, but my family and I played the game and we loved it. Days later, everybody kept saying how fun it was. It's a very simple game. The rules are even simpler than Trivial Pursuit, but there's a lot of strategy to it as well, and the questions are fun and interesting and sometimes hilarious. And all of the questions have two parts, so maybe you don't know the first part, but maybe you know the second part, or vice versa, like this one. What name is shared by a California NBA team and a California NHL team? The Kings. They're not all easy like that, but some of them are. There's wild cards and strategy and stealing and even consequences for getting an answer wrong. One of my favorite parts about this game is that there's 3 questions on each card, 3 rounds plus maybe a tiebreaker for each game. Like when me and my family played, there was 4 of us, and it took 45 minutes to an hour, and we only used 6 cards, and there's so many cards. We could play this game forever. Now, I'm not suggesting that you have to be drinking to play this game, but me and my family were, and I tell you what, it raises the fun level to 11. I highly recommend you try it, and you can do that for free by going to youknowitthegame.com, all one word, no spaces, and you can download and print a starter pack for free. There's also more cards available for science and sports, and even a special Generation Z pack. And if free isn't cheap enough for you, Streetwalkers can get 30% off on all other downloadable packs by using the discount code FSTREET at checkout. Once again, that's youknowitthegame.com, all one word, no spaces, and use the discount code FSTREET at checkout for 30% off all other downloadable packs. And if I'm being honest, Streetwalkers, I'm a little upset that I only got 1 copy of this game. My kids are adults, and they deserve a copy of this game so they can play with their friends too. Remember, the game is called You Know It, and it's a blast.
Let's get back into it.
So, in the case of comic books, if you overorder, let's say you're thinking that issue whatever is going to sell like gangbusters, and you order just like a shitload, and it doesn't happen, can you sell those books back?
No.
Oh,
it's
really?
on a non-returnable basis, yeah. So whatever you order is yours. So that's why it's so difficult to, you got to make sure that you're not getting too much. To gamble, you're gambling in the next 3 months because you placed the order 3 months before the item and product ships.
That's crazy. What do you think is a bigger seller? Well, I mean, not think, but what's bigger, comic books or statues and figurines and stuff like that?
In the past couple years, comic books. I mean, there was a time when in the early 2000s where we were selling a ton of statues. We had a huge statue selection, but that time has passed, and statues are not going like they used to go. I mean, I just don't people have that kind of disposable cash. We've seen definitely a slowdown on the higher end items moving at as briskly as they once did.
Do you think it's that demographic grew up and got married and now has kids and other responsibilities? And there's not really another, I guess, generation of that same comic book spender behind them?
I think that's definitely one of the factors. How many statues of Batman does the world really need, though? That's also got a factor. I mean, there literally must be hundreds of Batman statues that have been released since the statue market was born in probably in the late 80s when you saw the very first Batman statue produced. Since then, there must be hundreds of Batman statues. How many Batman statues does one person need?
Especially if they have a wife who's like, what the hell is this? What is your holy grail? In your personal collection, what's the one book you don't have that you want? If it was free, like if that, still valued at whatever, but if you didn't have to pay for it, what's the one book that you would want in your collection that you don't already have?
I mean, it would be probably, if I didn't have to pay for it, I would take an Action Comics #1 or Detective 27. I think those would be one of the two would be my choice if I didn't have to pick up the tab on it.
And you don't have either one of those?
No, those are those are big.
Those are $1 million books, right?
Big bucks. Yeah, they were printed well before my time,
Well, what do you think you would be doing if you didn't seize that opportunity to run the stash? Where would you be right now?
I think I would still be at the community center.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think I would have left. I don't think I would have had the opportunity. I mean, I don't know what did I have to offer any other employer, and B, I didn't have the interest in leaving. I walked to work. Where I lived with my parents, I could spit and hit the community center, and I got married and just moved exactly the same distance away, but on the opposite side. I bought a house like 4 streets over from the community center, and I could walk to work, walk home from work. And to me, that was perfect. There was no need for me to want to leave. I mean, it wasn't the greatest salary-wise, but just like at the stash, though, I created, a lifelong friendship with the guy who was my boss. And I enjoyed going there, and I enjoyed going to work there. At times, towards the end, like I said, I don't want to paint a picture, but I was jonesing, for, something to motivate me more, but I never once was like, I got to leave here. It was only really because Kev offered me that made me even think for a second, well, I should be doing something else, because if he didn't, I was totally happy where I was.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about Tell 'em Steve Dave.
Yes.
I was listening to the Smodcast podcast on the Smodcast Radio Network a long time ago, and I was actually listening, when that first episode came out, that you and Brian were on there, and y'all announced that y'all were going to do Tell 'em Steve Dave, and I was so excited. But I think that I might have been more excited than you at that time. It didn't really seem like that was something that you wanted to do. I don't feel like you're somebody who wants to be in front of a microphone or in front of a camera. So why did you do it? Why did you do Tell 'em Steve Dave?
Because Brian asked me to. Well, first Kevin asked me to come on his podcast, which
Sure.
I didn't even know what a podcast was when he even asked me. He was like, I'm going to record us talking, and I just want to talk to you about some old stories. And I was like, all right. And his, Smodcast took off. It was a big success right off the bat. And I guess Brian saw that, and with urging from Kevin, he was like, you guys should do this. You can do this. And so Brian asked me to do it. And I remember when he asked me to, we were in a car. I think we were going to a Devils game, and Kevin was driving. And they threw it out to me to do it. And I don't think they expected me to be like, all right. I guess they thought I would need more convincing. Even though, yeah, I'm not that comfortable, especially not back then. I wouldn't consider myself in any way, shape, or form comfortable. But I would be lying if I didn't say, like, I just thought that he would do it like once or twice and, he would lose interest, Brian. So in my mind, I was like, if you want to do it, I'll do it. I'll sit there and have a conversation with you. But I didn't think that it would really go more than a couple times. God's honest truth, I just assumed that, and then this is the way, not bashing. It was just I just assumed that, we would both lose interest, and it would just, be something like that we tried once or twice and possibly never even release them.
Really? The way you describe it, that y'all were in the car on the way to a Devils game, I feel like they picked that moment so that they could both gang up on you and convince you to do it.
Yeah, I don't know, but I think that they assumed that I would need as much convincing. It would be like, you got to come work at the stash, where he worked on me for almost a year trying to convince me to come over. I guess they assumed that I would take that level of prodding. And we just got in the car, so like they, the whole ride up, that they were going to be telling me all the reasons why I should do it. And it was all for naught, because I was like, yeah, let's do it.
So how was the rest of that ride? Were they just like, what the hell?
No, I guess it was just like, I guess it was just spitballing even back then. Like, we could talk about this, we could talk about this, and then we'll talk about this. I guess the rest of the ride was just like all the what ifs we were going to do.
So at what point did you guys decide to bring in Brian Quinn?
Immediately.
Really?
Brian said, hey, we're going to record this night or whatever. And I was like, okay. And when he showed up, Q was there, and he was like, yeah, I'm going to run the recorder, and I'm going to make sure everything records right. And I was like, oh, okay. And, and if you listen, I don't know if does he say 2 or 3 words that first episode?
Maybe not. I mean, if he does,
I don't even
it's
remember.
Less than 5 for sure.
And to be honest, though, I think we only did like 2 maybe before the inevitable, and I knew what would happen. I remember that we did one right before Thanksgiving, I think. And it was like the second or third one we recorded. And we left for that break for Thanksgiving, and we didn't record again. And no one mentioned it. And no one said, hey, let's do this again. And it just kind of like quietly just kind of died for whatever reason. Maybe it was just a lack of interest, or maybe Brian just wasn't in a great headspace at the moment. And I believe Kevin took the file and edited it, the first one, and released it.
Kevin did?
Yeah. He released it and put it out on the I don't even know if it was a Smodcast network at that, but he just released it.
It was, yeah. He put it on the Smodcast feed for sure.
I don't know. Yeah, was it called Smodcast Feedback? I don't know what it was released on.
Yeah, he just basically, if you were already subscribed to Smodcast, then all of a sudden you got the first episode of Tell 'em Steve Dave or whatever. And I think that maybe it's because he had promised his audience that was going to happen, and so he made sure that it did.
Yeah, he edited it. He put music behind it, and I guess the reaction to it really motivated Brian. Like, he saw that there was a positive response to it. And from that moment on, it became a regular thing, something that he wanted to do, and something that he was motivated to continue doing because of the positive response that the listeners gave to it. No way we would ever have done it again, though, if Kevin hadn't taken the file and took the initiative to cut it and release it.
Yeah, you don't think it would have happened?
I just think we would have forgot about it. We would have just moved on to something else, probably.
Which is what you thought was going to happen anyway.
Yeah, I assume that would happen anyway. And I'm not saying it their way. It's just that's just the way it is. It's just like, you don't ever assume that like this is going to be something we'll do for 10 straight years or whatever.
Back to your wife. What do your wife and kids think about this part of your life? I mean, I know that it's been around for a really long time in most of your children's lives, but
right.
How do they feel? Like, do they feel like it impinges on their, daughter daddy time or mommy daddy time, or like, does it get in the way or anything?
No, it never got in the way. I didn't even tell my kids. They were young. Like, they were 10 years, one was 7, one was 10, or 11. I'm staying later after work one night a week.
Right.
There was no need to explain to them why I was staying later, staying an extra hour and a half to 2 hours later one night a week when they were growing up. That was certainly not depriving them of any daddy-daughter time. But I think my wife was definitely leery of me saying something that, that would come back to cause her a misery. Like I would say something that I shouldn't have said at a line, or, something that I shouldn't have revealed. I was like, that ain't going to happen. I'll make sure that there's nothing said that's going to cause, like she thought, like maybe I would say something and get back to her employers, because she was a Catholic school teacher.
Oh, Catholic school. That makes a difference. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was always worried that something I said was going to blow up. And I was like, first off, this is not on TV. I said, this is such a tiny little audience that's listening to this. It would never get back to your employer. And I'm not going to say anything anyway, though. What do you think I'm going to say that's going to be that incendiary, that it's going to cause us to have to do damage control?
Right.
But that kind of let up really quick. And then my kids, much later, I told them, like, if I would, I want to record us doing an ad for this podcast I do. And they were well aware of what a podcast was at that point, but they just really never showed an interest in it at all, really.
Man, that's so crazy. It doesn't matter who I talk to, whether it's a director or an actor or a businessman, your kids just do not give a shit about what you do, man.
Well, and if you think back, though, I mean, I think that's just the cycle of life, because I wasn't interested in what my parents were doing when I was a teenager. I could give two shits less. Like if I found out what they were doing on their free time was this something, I would be like, oh, okay. But I certainly wouldn't have been fascinated by it or would want to know more and please tell me everything about what you're doing. I mean, that's just the way it is. I mean, you have your own, especially teenagers, they're not going to have any interest in what their parents are doing.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. How much of the Walt that's on Tell 'em Steve Dave is the actual Walt in real life? How much of that is guarded or edited?
It really depends on the week.
Really?
It really depends on what I said. I'm not gonna lie. There's definitely things I said at the table that I cannot release that. That will cause some headaches later on. Nothing crazy, just stuff that that maybe was too personal or too much of a window into my private life, or even a joke that maybe was just not in the best taste. I'm like, that's got to go.
Yeah, sometimes the jokes that are between friends are just supposed to stay between friends.
Yeah, exactly. But as personality-wise, I mean, if one extreme is the character, if you want to call it the character I played on Comic Book Men, and then you look at the person I am on Tell 'em Steve Dave, and then the real person I am, it's got to be closer to the Tell 'em Steve Dave one by far, but definitely not 100% that person that you hear on the mic. But it's kind of close. I think Brian is the same exact person.
Really?
I think Brian is the same. Yeah, I think Brian is the same exact person. I think Q is, but I guess it's always easier for me to think that way when I'm thinking about somebody else, because I know what I'm saying for response, or, it's just easier for me to see myself not as being exactly the real person that I am. But it's kind of close. I would think it's as close as possible.
What do you think they would say? Do you think they would agree with you that they're closer to the real them than you are?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
It is 2140. You are trapped in an underground bunker, built a century ago to protect mankind from the pandemic on the surface. Now ruled by tyrants and their robot army. You are an outcast, an orphan, a scavenger, blind, afraid, and alone. You are Ace, a survivor, and you will try to escape this place known as Subterra. Subscribe to Subterra at iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts.
Let's get back into it.
Now, a long time ago, you used to say that you hated the way your laugh sounds, like you hated it. So we're over a decade plus. I mean, we're almost 450 episodes into Tell 'em Steve Dave, and multiple episodes of all these other podcasts that you are doing on Patreon, which are not Tell 'em Steve Dave, but are adjacent. Many people have written in to you to tell you that your laugh is a wonderful sound, and I wholeheartedly agree. Your laugh is one of the things that brings true joy to me when I'm listening. And so my question is, have you changed your mind about your laugh?
No, I haven't changed. I mean, I still because now with the Patreon stuff that you mentioned, I edit some of the stuff, and I have to watch some of the first cuts of some of the videos that are made, which is something I never did because Brian did all that on the regular Tell 'em Steve Dave. So I am so much more exposed to my laugh and all the stutters and the ums and the uhs that it drives me nuts. It drives me nuts. And I'm like, and I have Gidim help me, like when we do audio edits, like on the tidbits. I don't have the technical prowess to go in and actually edit it myself. So we'll sit there and we'll listen to it, and Gidim has his laptop out, and he will make the edits on what I would like to have removed or moved around or whatever. And I have him taking out every fucking that I utter because it just drives me nuts. And he's like, well, shouldn't we be taking everyone else's out? And I go, no, I want to be here till fucking midnight. I said, just take mine out.
I do that same thing.
If they want the ums out, I'll send them the file and they can remove all the ums.
That's what I'm talking about. I just did it. When I first started doing my podcast, I started noticing how many times I say or and it was driving me insane. And so it was taking me forever to take all those out. And then after I finally got a handle on, I mean, I still do it all the time, and I'm just over it. I'd still take him out, but I'm not mad. But then after a few episodes, I started noticing that the guest does it. And sometimes, because my podcast is an interview podcast, so it's a different person every week, sometimes the other person's or is something else. Like they'll say, well, and they'll say it like 300 times in an hour. Or they'll say so, or, and so once you figure out what their is, then you got to go take all those out. It's a huge pain in the ass. So I feel you on that one.
I'm not worried about somebody else. For me personally, it drives me nuts to hear myself do it. So I'm willing to take mine out, but I'm not willing to sit there and take everybody else's out. Everybody else has got to live with their ums or their uhs or their wells.
That's hilarious. What is the craziest Tell 'em Steve Dave adventure that you have been on? Because you've been on a lot.
I don't know if I would classify any of the stuff as being crazy. Like when I think of crazy, I think of like...
You guys broke into an abandoned amusement park in New Orleans.
We didn't break into it, though.
Well,
we didn't break into it, though. The very fact of the whole video is that we didn't have the balls to do it. We didn't do it. I mean, I would not call that crazy.
All right. Okay. Well, how about the abandoned mental asylum or whatever the fuck?
Oh, yeah, we did that. That one, we did break the law and go onto the ground.
No, but do you think that's crazy? I mean, you have Frank, whatever number on there talking about portals and demons, and then you had a hypnotist and...
No. That's Sargel 18.
Oh, yeah, Sargel. Sorry. My
Frank 5 doesn't talk about portals and demons.
Yeah. Sorry. But, I mean, you don't, you just consider all that tepid? Like, none of that's crazy to you?
No. I mean, to me, yeah, I kind of reserve the word crazy for something that I guess I have a different definition of crazy. That I guess is just like a subject matter going to the abandoned. Because really nothing crazy happened. It was kind of mundane. It was kind of, at the end of the day, it was like you're trying to make lemonade out of lemons because, nothing really all that great happened. And you're just trying to find some humor and something to capture people's attention over the fact that we didn't see any ghosts. We didn't get in the amusement park. And thankfully, people don't really care that you didn't see a ghost or you actually didn't get into the amusement park. They're more interested in the interactions between everybody more than the the actual event or non-event.
That makes sense. Maybe I just think it's crazy because most of my interactions are either face-to-face or like this, sitting on the phone talking to somebody. So there's not a whole lot of crazy stuff that I could do with the guests. So maybe that's it.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Yeah, we definitely, especially on the Patreon, we do more, I hate the word, but I can't think of anything else to describe like the Sunday Jeff show as other than zany, try to be a little bit like silly.
I feel like the Sunday Jeff show, the all new Sunday Jeff show, is your baby. Am I right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I love how boyish Sunday Jeff is. Like his agreeing to any silly shit that I'm like, I want to try this, I want to do this, and he's like, and he doesn't care. And because he's not a zany guy in any way, shape, or the form, he's not a guy that like comes across as. He's kind of very stoic in real life. He has a sense of humor, but he's not like some like wild and crazy guy. But like, he's a very reserved kind, much like myself. So then for me to be like, well, I want you to eat this fig and pretend it's something else. I want you to do this. I want you to do this. And his smile and his willingness to be silly just tickles me because I just didn't expect it to be that easy. And his agreeing to be out there and put himself in a position where, he gets kind of teased for not being fluent and he shouldn't be hosting it. But that to me is the absolute charm of it all, is that like he shouldn't be the man directing anything, but yet he is. And that gives me so much pleasure because it's exactly what I thought it would be when I thought it up.
Other than the actual mothership of Tell 'em Steve Dave, the all-new Sunday Jeff show is my favorite show that comes on the Patreon. Like, it's really my favorite show that has spun out of all that. All the other ones are cool, but that one is my absolute favorite, and it's only because it sounds like you guys are honestly having the most fun possible.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, I'm not going to lie, man. It's nothing but fun. It's just, I wanted to do something different. Tell 'em Steve Dave is, mostly it's talking about our lives.
Yeah.
And if you look at what the Sunday Jeff show is, we don't really hear what Sunday Jeff's life is like. We don't know what he does day to day. So I wanted it to be different because we have that. I have that outlet on Tell 'em Steve Dave to talk about the world or our worlds. On this one, I was like, I want it to be completely devoid of that, almost like our lives and the real world don't exist while we're doing it.
It kind of reminds me of like a newish version of like an old-timey variety show. Like, you never know what you're going to get on the Sunday Jeff show.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, that's what I mean. When I first pitched it to him, I was like, this is what I want it to be. I want to do this, and this. I thought, again, like, I guess like how the guys thought it would be like with me. I thought I would be like pulling teeth to get him to do some of the things, but it's like his willingness to do it with a friggin' smile from ear to ear. It gives me, it just makes me so ready to do the next one then, because he's so happy to do it.
I was going to bring that up. It sounds like you got your own Walt.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But I knew that but I always knew that with him though. I mean, from the first moment I met him, I knew that he was a guy unlike any other friend that I had. He was this paradox, and he's just a different dude. He's just a different type of personality, but he's always up for anything. And not that we do crazy stuff, but he's up for it, no matter what I ask him to do. And not that anybody else, everybody else is. I mean, Frank is,
sure.
Hugh is, Bry is, they all are, but like, I didn't expect that level of craziness from Sunday. And, he's surprised me pleasantly.
Well, he has also surprised us. Well, at least me. I can't speak for everybody, but he has surprised me. So, good job. I don't know if Jeff is going to listen to this, but good job, Jeff.
Well, probably not. I don't think he's listening to any podcast.
Now, remember earlier when I said that if I asked you about something and you didn't want to answer it, then we would just move on?
Yeah.
This is one of those times.
Okay.
You talk about your mom very rarely, but you never ever talk about your dad. Is there a reason?
I think I kind of did talk about this on Tell 'em Steve Dave, though. I didn't really have a real close relationship with my father. Him and my mother split up as I was getting very close to adulthood, and he went his...
Wait, you were that old? I would have imagined this happened when you were very, very young, but this was when you were in your teens?
Yeah, but I mean, our relationship was never, we barely spoke from like 12 to like before he left, and he was basically just, he lived there, but he really wasn't there, and
wow.
When he left, there was very little to motivate me to keep up with him, and so I never did, and I really haven't heard from him or know what he's up to. Someone came in years ago, an old school mate came into the store and was like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I heard about your dad." And I was like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, I heard your father passed away." Now, I don't even know if that's true, but I kind of thought, I went home and I told my wife, and I was like, this guy came in and said that my dad passed away. And she's like, "You probably would have known. Somebody would have alerted you." But I don't know. Yeah, I really don't. There's really not much to say. It just kind of like, I'm sure just like a lot of people out there, this wasn't a strong enough, not even barely a relationship, so there wasn't anything to keep us in touch once, he was out of our lives.
Wow. And so I guess this was a few years ago that somebody came in and told you that at the store. So, I mean, clearly there wasn't enough between you for you to find out.
Yeah, I didn't even investigate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and my wife was like, "Are you going to go try to find out?" And I was like, "Well, what's it?" Like, the impression that this guy came in and told me was like it had happened, a couple months ago. So I was like, "Well, what's the point?" I said, "What if I find out it's yay or nay? I mean, how's it going to change anything?" I said, "See, there's nothing for me to even waste my time looking to find out if it was true or not, because it won't change anything."
Well, that makes sense. Well, thank you for answering that. I really didn't know what to get from that.
Yeah, I thought that I had, I guess I really haven't, but yeah, I thought that was pretty obvious.
You've only vaguely mentioned him, and really
vaguely,
only
okay.
In the sense that he kind of wasn't around and you're okay with that. That was really...
He was around a lot, but he just emotionally wasn't around.
Interesting.
He was around, he was around a ton. He just wasn't there, wherever he was not at home. Like, his mind was somewhere else. His body was there, but he was not interested in any of the things that were going on in anyone's life.
Did your mom ever remarry?
No, she never remarried.
Wow. Cool. Well, good for her. That's a strong woman then.
Yes.
Back in the early days of Tell 'em Steve Daves, there was a bit of shit talking and rivalry between you guys and Malcolm Ingram. Was it all in good fun, or did anyone get too carried away with all of it?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, just like with ISO Comics, with Mike and Ming, any ball busting is just that, man. There was never any real attempt to hurt anybody's feelings or to make somebody feel, or to get upset with anything. And I always assumed that was understood. I know for a fact, that like there's, when we do it to Mike and Ming, there's a line, just like in anybody's relationship, there's always a line. And, Brian will try to push that line to joke around with I Sell Comics. But I think that Mike and Ming, based upon how much we include them in everything that we do, or we know when we're doing something special that calls for bringing in the Tell 'em Steve Dave extended family, they're always at the top of the list. So they know that like it's all just said in pure jest and in the art of ball busting. And I hope they realize that. I know Ming and Mike do, but there's listeners though that like they don't realize though that like that takes years of cultivating a friendship and having other parts of your life in your experiences with Mike and Ming be not ball busting and be friends and be warm with them. It's not all of the ball busting. So when people come into the store and start to try to bust balls that I Sell Comics, I'm just like, oh my God, please don't. That is not something that people should be doing. You have to earn that, or have the person that you're busting balls realize that like you're true friends with them. And you have to earn that right before you can start busting balls on other people, complete strangers.
Yeah, it's like a little brother or a little sister, like I can pick on him, but I'll beat your ass if you pick on him.
Yeah, I mean, I always hope that people realize that, like, those guys are dear friends, and we don't really mean any of the things we say. It's all said in jest. It's all said just to make each other laugh. So everybody in the whole Tell 'em Steve Dave family, anytime we bust their balls, I mean, or my balls, I never take it personally. I never take it as if it's true or anything. So I know 99% do, but boy, sometimes I get emails and I'm like, holy fuck, this motherfucker's crazy. They think that what we say is gospel regarding, busting balls.
Yeah, I think probably for the most part, like you said, I think for the most part your audience does know that, but there's probably a few crazies out there, yeah.
There's some that don't.
All right, guys, I think I'm going to cut it right there. That's long enough. Make sure you come back next week for the super fascinating conclusion to my conversation with Walt Flanagan. As always, thanks for listening, Streetwalkers. And don't forget, follow the show on Twitter at FascinationSTPD, on Instagram at FascinationStreetPod. Follow the podcast page on Facebook at Fascination Street Podcast. And of course, you can always email me at fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and rate us on iTunes. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.